They say the loneliest place on Earth is the driver's seat of a big rig at 2 a.m. They're wrong. The loneliest place is realizing the cargo you're hauling is your own damn coffin, and you're already late for the funeral. In the quiet sprawl of the American Southwest, where sprawling cities give way to endless stretches of nothing, the night sky always felt heavier, more profound. Here, the weak glow of distant streetlights painted the asphalt in pale, sickly yellow stripes, just enough to illuminate a small fraction of the lonely road where a semi-truck sat idling. Jacob sat in the cabin, nursing the last cigarette of a long day. He stared out into the hazy void ahead, his thoughts as murky as the darkness. These kinds of drives were nothing new to him. He was a creature of the night, a long-haul trucker who had become more familiar with solitude than with any human being. He'd haul anything for anyone, no questions asked. He knew every curve, every incline of these deserted highways by heart. For nearly 10 years, this Peterbilt had been his home, his world. He'd crossed the country more times than he could count, becoming so intimately acquainted with the dark that it felt like a second skin. Jacob was a man of few words. The constant deafening roar of the engine was his closest friend, and the vast silence of the open road was his confessional, the only place he could sift through the private debris of a life he rarely spoke of. His existence was a simple repeating loop. Get the order, drive through the night, a brief stop at a roadside dive for coffee, and then back on the road, a machine built for perpetual motion. The longer the trip, the bigger the paycheck. That was the only equation that mattered. All Jacob wanted was a small roof over his head someday and enough money to make the days pass. His world contained nothing else but the job and his familiar, road-dusted truck. He was lost in this familiar haze when the vibration of his phone jolted him back to reality. A new message glowed on the screen. Head to the suburban gas station. Pick up the shipment. Pay is double. Ask no questions. The words were short, cold. The offer of double pay was a powerful hook. It was a little surprising, but not entirely unfamiliar. In his line of work, he was used to these silent, off-the-books transactions. No paperwork, no names. He'd learned early on that taking a delivery without asking questions was the best form of self-preservation. Jacob had his own set of rules, and the first one was absolute. Don't get curious. In his experience, the less you knew, the longer you lived. He stubbed out his cigarette, watching the smoke dissolve into the night. He turned the key. The engine roared to life, a familiar thunder that shattered the oppressive silence and pulled him into a new journey, a journey that, unbeknownst to him, would become the most terrifying haul of his life. When Jacob arrived at the gas station, the place was unnervingly deserted. The only light came from the flickering bulbs above the pumps, which threw bizarre, dancing shapes onto the ground. He parked the rig and scanned the area, a knot of unease beginning to tighten in his stomach. It didn't take long. A figure emerged from the deepest part of the darkness. A tall, gaunt silhouette in a long, dark coat, face completely obscured by shadow, often standing motionless at a distance. His face was a featureless blur in the oppressive night. The man approached Jacob's truck, dragging a large, long piece of cargo covered in black canvas. Jacob was surprised. The package was huge, yet the man pulled it along the ground as if it weighed nothing, as if it were filled with air. Even more bizarrely, the man then lifted the entire thing with a single hand and placed it onto the truck bed. He said nothing. He simply gave a curt nod, turned, and vanished back into the shadows as quickly and silently as he had appeared. Jacob stood frozen for a moment, a shiver running down his spine. He took a deep breath and walked to the back of the truck. His hand hesitated before pulling back a corner of the black canvas. He flinched. Underneath the cloth was a coffin. It was old, made of a dark wood that seemed to have weathered countless years. Its intricate carvings were faded, and a thick layer of dust covered its ornate patterns, giving it an ancient, unsettling presence. Jacob looked around, searching for any sign of the man, but there was only the suffocating night. It was just him and the silent coffin. A cold gust of wind swept through, making the hair on his arms stand up. He quickly composed himself, remembering his #1 rule: don't get curious. Double the pay, Jacob muttered aloud, a mantra to push away the creeping dread. In this job, you sometimes had to ignore the unusual. As long as the truck ran, he drove. Jacob pushed the coffin deeper inside. The heavy sound of wood scraping against the metal floor echoed unnervingly in the quiet night. After securely locking the trailer door, he climbed back into the driver's seat. He lit another cigarette to steady his nerves. His eyes flickered to the rearview mirror for a split second before he shifted gears and rolled out of the station, leaving the strange feeling and the darkness behind. The truck slowly gained speed, its shadow bleeding across the damp pavement before disappearing into the pitch-black night ahead. In the back, the coffin lay still, yet it projected a chilling presence that made the back of Jacob's neck prickle. In the dim light from the dashboard, Jacob thought he saw a shadowy form flicker in the reflection of the rearview mirror, just for an instant. He shook his head, trying to dismiss the thought. He told himself this was just another night, just another job, nothing more. But deep down, a vague, unsettling premonition was beginning to grow, coiling in the pit of his stomach. The desolate highway stretched out before him. The truck's headlights cut a weak tunnel through the darkness, casting a pale glow on the cold asphalt. Inside the cabin, Jacob sat perfectly still, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the consuming void ahead. For a driver like him, the night was a familiar companion, the darkness just a wrapper for his work. But this night felt different. He wasn't sure how much time had passed, but the dashboard clock now read nearly 2 a.m. It was the dead hour, a time when everything becomes oppressively silent. Not a single car passed him. No headlights appeared in the distance. It was as if the world had gone still, and he was the only one left in it, trapped. Even the familiar rumble of his engine sounded strange tonight, like an echo from a distant place where no one else existed. Suddenly, a strange sound came from the cargo bed behind him, a soft, rhythmic knock. Tap, tap, tap. It echoed faintly in the dead quiet of the night. At first, Jacob tried to rationalize it. It was just the poorly secured cargo shifting with the rhythm of the road. Old wood creaking, nothing more. But the sound persisted, a steady, deliberate beat that refused to be ignored. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't random. It was rhythmic, patient, as if someone or something was deliberately trying to get his attention. Sweat, cold and slick, began to form on his brow. A single drop traced a path down his temple. He tried to reassure himself, thinking it must be wood rubbing against metal or some part of the load that hadn't been properly secured. But a small, whispering part of his mind knew better. This was different. He had hauled countless loads through countless nights, but he had never felt a chill like this. To break the suffocating tension, he decided to turn on the radio, hoping the familiar noise of a late-night talk show or some classic rock would make the space feel normal again. But as he twisted the knob, no music came out. Instead, the speakers hissed with an unnatural, piercing static. He spun the dial, searching for a clear station, but the static was relentless. And then, beneath the hiss, he heard it. A whisper, faint and ethereal, seemed to rise from deep within the speakers. It was fragmented, barely there, like a distant, sorrowful voice. Suddenly, the knocking from the back grew louder. It was no longer a gentle tap, but a hard, insistent pounding, as if someone were now beating their fists against the inside of the coffin lid. The sound of splintering wood, sharp and dry, made the air in the cab feel thick enough to choke on. Every frantic beat sent a jolt of ice through Jacob's veins. His hands clenched the steering wheel. His breathing grew ragged. He shot a glance at the rearview mirror. The coffin was still there, a block of solid darkness. But for a horrifying second, he thought he saw something else. A flicker of movement, a vague, human-like shadow standing next to it. He blinked, his heart hammering against his ribs. When he looked again, it was gone. He was almost breathless, his eyes locked on the mirror, waiting, not daring to move. The moment stretched into an eternity of silence. It was just him, the coffin, and his own frantic heartbeat. "It's just my imagination," he whispered, forcing himself to focus on the road. But his hands trembled, and a deep, penetrating cold began to settle over him. The air in the cab was changing. It was as if an invisible door had creaked open, letting in a draft from a frozen, dead place. The cold seeped into his skin, a damp chill that slid past his jacket and down his spine, raising goosebumps all over his body. He turned, holding his breath, and peered through the small window into the cargo bay. Everything was still, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something inside that box was moving. Without warning, the entire rig shuddered and lurched, throwing Jacob against his seatbelt. He slammed on the brakes, the tires screaming as the truck skidded to a halt in the middle of the deserted road. He stared wildly into the darkness, his hand shaking as it reached for the door handle. Almost immediately, the knocking started again, this time more frantic than ever, like the desperate pleas of someone trapped and suffocating. He couldn't take it anymore. He threw the door open and stumbled outside. He approached the rear of the trailer and pressed his ear against the cold metal. The moment he did, the knocking stopped. Complete silence. All he could hear was his own ragged breathing in the vast, empty night. For a moment, he almost gave in to the maddening curiosity, almost unlatched the door and thrown open that coffin. But his own rule, his professional instinct for survival, held him back. "This is just a job," he told himself, his voice a harsh whisper. He took a deep, shuddering breath, stepped back, and slammed the trailer door shut. The clang of the rusty latch echoed in the silence. He didn't dare look back as he climbed into the cab, jammed the truck into gear, and slammed his foot on the gas. The heavy trunk lurched forward, but as it sped through the night, a creeping fear remained coiled in Jacob's mind. This journey had changed. The truck sped on, the engine a constant drone against a thick fog that had begun to roll in, blanketing the highway. Jacob kept his eyes glued to the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Suddenly, he saw a figure standing on the shoulder of the road, a tall, thin shape in a dark, long coat, standing utterly motionless. Its gaze seemed to follow the truck as it passed. For a second, Jacob thought he was hallucinating, but when he glanced in the rearview mirror, the figure was still there, a stone statue watching him, its eyes, even from a distance, seeming to hold a deep, hollow darkness that bored right through the back of the truck. Goosebumps erupted across his skin. He snapped his gaze back to the road, trying to keep his composure, but the image of that figure was burned into his mind. He didn't know if it was a real person or a trick of the fog, but his heart was now pounding in his chest. He forced himself to focus, to maintain his speed, but it wasn't long before the truck shuddered again. It wasn't the road, it felt like a force from within. He grit his teeth as the knocking resumed, louder and more violent than before. Then it stopped. A long moment of silence passed. Jacob took a shuddering breath and risked a glance in the rearview mirror. Nothing. No figure, no movement. But before he could turn away, in the dim light of the cab, he saw something new. On the inside of the trailer door, a faint handprint was materializing. It was pale, etched in dust and grime, as if it had been clinging there for a very long time. "What the hell?" he breathed, his eyes locked on the impossible shape. Then the knocking started again, but this time it wasn't coming from the trailer. It was coming from inside the cab, right behind his seat. He spun around, a scream catching in his throat. He didn't know how many times he'd looked back tonight, but the space behind him was as empty as ever. Only the dark, silent coffin was visible through the small window. He clenched his teeth, trying to ignore it, but the chilling sensation grew stronger, as if someone was sitting right beside him, silently watching his every move. Stop the truck, the thought flashed in his mind, a primal survival instinct. He couldn't take the pressure anymore. He slammed on the brakes again, pulling over to the shoulder, his heart threatening to burst from his chest. The moment the truck stopped, the silence in the darkness outside seemed to press in, thick and suffocating. He stumbled out of the cab, the cold, damp air hitting him like a physical blow. He walked to the back of the rig, his hands trembling as he reached for the lock, his mind a maelstrom of terrifying possibilities. The truck had become a cage, the coffin a vessel of unspeakable horror. And he was trapped on the road with it, alone, in the dead of night. He stood there, in the suffocating silence, his trembling hand on the cold latch. His mind was a battlefield of warring instincts, the primal need to flee versus the maddening urge to see. Before he could make a choice, a new sound cut through the night. Not a knock, but a voice. "Mister?" Jacob spun around. A child was standing there, a little girl. He squinted, confused. "Who are you? What are you doing out here in the middle of the night? Where are your parents?" Her face was a pale oval in the gloom, her eyes large and shimmering with unshed tears. She looked both heartbreakingly lovely and deeply, unnervingly sad. "Mister, please help us." He hesitated, the terror from the truck momentarily replaced by concern. "An accident?
"What's wrong? Tell me what happened," he urged, his voice raspy. The girl didn't answer. She just stared at him with a look of hopeless despair. He pressed on. "Who's hurt? I can't help if you don't tell me what's going on."
She remained silent, her gaze fixed on him. Annoyed, Jacob started to stand up, to leave her be. But as he moved, she slowly lifted her head. The dim light caught her face, and Jacob recoiled. It was now slick with blood. Her hair was matted down in dark, wet clumps. The change was so sudden, so impossible, that he froze. Her eyes were still sad, but now they held a terrifying emptiness.
You're hurt," he stammered. "Please, don't leave my family," she whispered, her voice cracking. She slowly turned and pointed a small blood-stained hand across the road. Jacob followed her gaze, and his blood ran cold. 2 more figures were standing there. The faint, slightly transparent silhouettes of a broad-shouldered man and a slender woman. Even through the fog, he could feel their eyes on him, a gaze so intense it felt like a physical weight. They hadn't been there a moment ago.
Fear, absolute and pure, seized him. These weren't people. He stumbled backward, turning to run, but the little girl was gone from his path. The 2 figures from across the road were suddenly closer, their silent pleas echoing in his head. "Help us! Save our family!" Then another voice, deeper and colder, the voice from the radio, slithered into the mix. "Don't open the coffin." The conflicting messages tore at his sanity. He scrambled back toward the cab, thinking only of escape. But as he yanked the door open, he screamed. They were already inside. The entire family sitting there as if waiting for him. The man and woman stared blankly from the passenger seat. The little girl sat on the dashboard, her head tilted at an impossible angle. Jacob's vision swam, the world dissolving into a tunnel of blackness. His mind collapsed, and he fell into an abyss of shadow and silence. In that void, memory returned, not as a dream, but as a vivid, horrifying reality. He was on a familiar, winding road. Fog, the drone of his engine. He remembered the heavy exhaustion, the way his eyelids felt like lead weights. Just a second's distraction, a moment of his head nodding forward. Then, blinding headlights piercing the mist. The screech of tires. He saw it all. The other car, a family sedan swerving wildly. The father's face, a mask of terror. The mother's silent scream, her arms wrapped around her child. The sickening crunch of metal, the explosion of glass. And he remembered the little girl, her small, innocent face, her eyes wide and empty, staring right at him through the spiderweb of shattered glass. It was an image of stolen life, a final, silent accusation. Then only darkness. Jacob gasped, jolting awake. He was back in his truck, drenched in a cold sweat. The cab was empty. The first faint light of dawn was breaking. The silence felt clean, safe. It was over. It was all a nightmare. Relief washed over him, so powerful it almost made him weep. Then his phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. A new message. His heart stopped. The words were identical. Head to the suburban gas station. Pick up the shipment. Pay is double. Ask no questions. It wasn't a dream. It was a loop. A prison made of asphalt and time. This time there was no hesitation, no fear, only a desperate need for an answer, for an end. He stormed to the back of the truck, threw open the doors and ripped the black canvas away. The old dusty coffin sat there, waiting. Ignoring the chorus of ghostly warnings in his head, he dug his fingers under the lid and pulled. It opened with a groan of ancient wood. Jacob stared inside, and the world fell away. Lying on the faded white satin was a body, his body. His worn flannel shirt, his jeans, his boots, his face, pale and waxy, his eyes closed in the stillness of death. It was him. A choked sound escaped his throat. As he stared, the corpse's eyes snapped open. They were black pits, empty of life, but filled with a cold, piercing awareness. They stared right into him. A voice, his own but distorted and dead, echoed in his mind. Why were you so curious? Jacob stumbled back, his legs giving way. The corpse in the coffin began to sit up. The movement was stiff, unnatural, accompanied by the dry crackle of stiff joints. It slowly raised a hand, his hand, and reached for him, the fingers long and skeletal. The stench of decay, of his own decay, filled the air. He screamed, a raw, final sound of a soul shattering. As the cold fingers were about to touch him, the full memory flooded back. The impact, the crushing weight, his own final gasping breath. He hadn't caused the accident and driven away. He had died in it too. A shadow fell over him. The tall, gaunt silhouette in a long, dark coat was standing there by the coffin. The guide, the ferryman, the warden of his personal hell.
You forgot the first rule, Jacob. The guide's voice rumbled, not in the air, but in the space where his soul used to be. No curiosity. You will never escape. You will forever carry the weight of this coffin, the weight of your sin. This is the price.
Jacob felt himself being pulled, his essence dissolving back into the cold night. The brief dawn faded, the darkness returned, the world reset. His consciousness dwindled, but just before it vanished completely, he heard the guide's final, chilling words.
Time to go. Your next delivery is waiting.